Okay, so to start things off, I'm going to do a basic seascape. And out here on the horizon is where the water is deepest. So before we get into all the reflection and the complex things about water, let's just talk about how the depth affects the color. So water has a color, and this water I want to look, I want to make like a paradise blue beach. Let's make a pretty beach. And it's going to be brighter and brighter as it gets more shallow because more light is bouncing off of the sea floor and coming back out, and the deep water has a lot more shadows in it. So my point is that it's darker at the top, lighter, 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 and more the color of the sand as it gets down here. So let me show you. To start out, I'll start making my horizon. And I'm going to try to keep things as simple as possible. So I'm just going to use blue and white for my overall water color in this scene. Now on the horizon, I'm going to mix some red with that. That's the only place in this that I'm going to use any red, because in the deep water, in an ocean, there might be a coral reef here that the light bounces off of the bottom and turns the water more green, a bright turquoise green hue, but in the deep water that's not the case. And so where there's less green, there's more red. You can learn more about that in my color theory and paint series on YouTube. But to be more red is to be less green. To be more green is to be less red. Okay, a handy thing I keep around is this XIM extender. And since water-based paint dries very quickly, it's nice to have something to slow the dry time. Water thins it and slows the dry time, but this slows the dry time more. So I'm just going to pour that into a little plastic container here. I always use these to store paint, to mix paint. They're handy little things to have around. They're nice because they have a lid. They come with a lid. You can store it later. Store it for later use. So I'll just dip my brush into that. That is not the recommended use. You're not supposed to just dip in and use it, but I do. That's the way I like to do it. You're supposed to mix it right with the paint. And it's like a real small percentage you put in. I don't know. I never do things like the instructions say. All right, here we go. We're making the horizon. Blue and red. A little bit of red, mostly blue. Now I'm going to speed through this so that I can do a good example for you. And then I'm just going to kind of fine tune it off camera, so don't get mad at me for that. When you're doing a gradient, this is a gradient where you fade from one color to the next. You do two colors at a time. You get your starting color, and you get the color you want to go to, and then you blend them together. So I want to use this color on the horizon, and then I want to use a blue and white mix toward the middle. I want it to get lighter and lighter as it goes down, so let me show you. I use this 4-inch roller. I always roll this on at this 45-degree angle because it smears it and rolls it at the same time, which causes it not to splatter. And it helps to mix it. Okay, so you see I have two colors. Once I have the two colors on, then I can come back with my brush and blend them together. They're already drying on me because this prime coat that I have under it is still fresh. And even though that coat is dry, it activates the dryers in this coat. So if you have trouble with dry time, a good thing to do is just wait a day before you put in another coat. I know that's annoying, but the reason that it dries super fast is because there's a catalyst that's activated in that base coat. But in this case, I'm just going to work fast. Let's do more of this blue. I really like this blue just straight out of the can. It has just a little bit of a turquoise hue to it, and I love it for ocean water, for that tropical looking ocean water. We'll do this. Let's put some more white down here. See, I'm starting to get lighter right there. Now it might help also if you try this. It might be helpful to pre-mix your colors. Mix this color in a separate container, mix this color in a separate container. And then you can save them, and you save yourself time, and you're able to move faster. I just do it this way because I like to be creative and change the color as I go. But it is harder. Definitely harder to do. Okay, now you see how this color is darker than this color. I want to make sure that this gets darker, darker, darker all the way to the top until I do my next layer. That's when I'll change that up a little bit. Okay. One thing you always have to remember with this water-based paint is that it darkens as it dries. So what you're seeing here is a shade lighter than what the final result is going to be. So you see I'm darkening my horizon so that I can have a consistently darker, darker gradient. And up there I had just a little bit of red. That might be too much. Put that in there. Like this. Yeah, I like that color. Right, now I continuously, when I'm painting a picture, I'm always dipping into the water over and over and over as I go. Because the paint just dries so quick. But the reason I don't use oil base is because I need this to dry quick. Because I want to quickly go over it with other layers. And that's the advantage of using acrylic paint, is that you can keep going over it immediately after with multiple layers and get really complex stuff going on. I like the paint a lot more for that. Oil, it's really hard to start adding white to this big thick mess of oil-based paint. And it's stickier and it doesn't flow as quickly. So I like using water-based. Alright, so now I'm going to start putting this lighter color on here. We're getting lighter, lighter, lighter. I have a few light spots in here. I'm just going to leave them. Maybe I'll fix them later if I feel like I need to. As it gets down here, the seafloor is getting very shallow, and so I need to start adding the color of sand to it. So I'm going to need some yellow. Orange and white is what I'm going to use for sand. Orange is made from red and yellow. So down at the very bottom, I'm adding red and yellow. Right here. And now I'm going to need a lot of white because that color is way too dark. Okay. So we'll go like this. See how I got my end colors, and then I start blending them together in the middle. I have to move quickly. There's just no way around that. But that extender does help. It also helps to use a real big brush. And you see I'm using a giant 3-inch brush. Not your typical tool for painting, for doing any kind of fancy detail work, but I have to be able to move quick and put a lot of paint on. Now in a painting, it's like 80% of the picture is your foreground. It's only this narrow strip right here that's really your distant background right here. So I want to make sure that I make this sandy beach go out a good ways, or else this is going to have like a curving down effect. I think I see very frequently paintings that have just not enough space designated to foreground. Okay. I liked it till I get that light color right up in there. Let's add a little bit of blue to take that away. Okay, I'm going to put all kinds of waves and texture over the top of this, so it doesn't need to be perfect. I'm liking this gradient right here. Darker, 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 except for that. I got to fix that. Now, down here, I want to make some sand. So that sand needs to be very light. Water traps light. Light reflects off of the surface as it's trying to escape. So water that's under, or light that's under, trying to get out, bounces off the surface and goes back down. Light that's above bounces off the surface and goes back up. This is an important thing about water because the effect of it is that when you look at the beach, you'll see that it's slightly darker where this little bit of water is not covering sand. Or it might be slightly lighter because the sand is wet and has a reflection. My point is that it'll be a different darkness right on that line where the sand is, just because the light that's bouncing around all underneath the surface is different than the light that's on the dry surface. So I'm going to make the water line just slightly darker than where the sand comes out. You only have so many brightness levels to work with paint. I mean, you can see a very intense bright light at the same time that you can see a very dark shadow, but not so with a painting. We can't even produce that level of contrast. So you have to choose what the focus of the picture is. So I'm just going to overexpose the sand. The sand is so much lighter than the shadows in the deep water that in a photo it might appear as just pure white. Where the sun's hitting it. Or if it's kind of overcast day, you might see everything if the light's not too intense. I'm liking how this looks. Yeah, this actually is not pure white. This is working out pretty good. I like that sand color. So I'm just going to cut a line here. Maybe we'll make a wave kind of coming up here, so I'll round this like that. Maybe we'll make another one coming down this way. Here. Yeah, now I just need to even these out. Now, I don't really want this. I'm seeing that this is darker than this. I don't think I really want that. So I might need to darken this up a little bit. So I'm going to go back and forth to get some consistency going here. Okay. It's just very subtle, these differences in hues. Just the smallest difference. Okay, so just give me a minute to fine tune this before I do the next layer. I just want to make this gradient smoother. I'll just look for dark spots, light spots, try to make it more even. But that's the basics. That's how I do it. I have the darkest, I have the lightest, I have less green up here because I might have a coral reef here, and it gets lighter and lighter as the depth gets shallower and shallower, and there's more light bouncing out of the water off of the sand. So the next thing I'm going to need is a reflection color to put on the surface of this after it's dry. To mix that color, I need to first know what it's reflecting so I know what color to make. I'm going to make the reflection of this giant blue sky. So I'm basically going to mix this color and use it over this water. So to do that, white, blue, and red. But I will mix it just a little bit darker and bluer because the reflection is never brighter than the source. You can always tell when a photo's been photoshopped when the water has a more brilliant image in the reflection than the real image above the water. So I'm going to do this. Now what I need with this this particular stage is for my paint to be very watered down. So I'm going to put a lot of water in there. Yeah, this is a slow way to do it. Very good. Blue. Okay, you can see the consistency of this. Pretty runny. You wouldn't be able to tip this sideways without it running out of the can, so that's kind of how thin you need it to be in order to do this. I'm going to do a little test over here on the picture. It's pretty good. Maybe just add a little bit more blue. Okay, good. This is the color right here. So, in order to apply it, I'm going to need a smaller brush. So, these ocean waves are going to be more extreme out here, and they're going to die down and get smoother and smoother, and almost no waves here right on the embankment, except for maybe some white surf that maybe I'll throw in at the end there. So to do this technique, this is on a YouTube video that I also have posted, how to paint ocean water. And I'm going to start up here on this darker water and just start making some waves. And the key here is that I get nice feathered edges. They taper out, smaller as they taper. And I try to stay very similar with all of my angles. I don't suddenly do one at an angle that nothing else is, because that tells your eyes something very strange is going on. You're no longer on planet Earth. So we keep very similar angles to all these waves. I get smaller and smaller as I get higher in the picture. Now I have it watered down, so it's very light, so I can do multiple layers. And I can really work on an area, build it lighter if I want to. When we get to doing pool water, you'll see that we can use a similar technique. I can also use it more, see now I have it a lot heavier on my brush. I can use it more concentrated. And I'm just doing these swooping motions. Now sometimes I do the frown, sometimes I do the smile, sometimes I build a frown out of smiles. But I'm always trying to feather those edges so that I don't have, do you see this, how it's feathered upward? This is a lot more possible with this kind of brush. Sable hair, very cheap brush I got at the department store. Not to be confused with Walmart. All right. But these are much smaller bristles than the brushes I was using before. These have much fatter bristles, and they'll leave a lot more streaks. But because of these small bristles, and it's a shorter brush so it's stiffer, I can really get a smooth gradient. All right, here we go. Let's make more of these. I do want to be careful not to make, see this is kind of a no-no, making a line straight across the whole picture. I got to watch out that I don't do that. So it's good to work in diagonal lines. Maybe you think of the perspective, think of a vanishing point, work along lines up to the horizon. Let's try some more. And I'll keep a rag handy. Let's get this guy. I always keep a rag handy and just throw it on the table. And I just use it to dab off my brush. I get my brush wet very frequently as I'm working because the paint wants to booger up in those bristles and mess it up. Okay, so making waves. Now this is not easy. I'm not going to try to confuse you. Try to tell you that all you do is just go like this and then it's done. You know, this is a trained motor skill with my hand to try to quickly do this degree of these little smiley and frowny shapes. And so you start slow, you kind of get a feel for it. So what's happening here is these are the angles. You know, I'm gonna show you on a whiteboard what's happening here. So let's just keep going with this technique. I feather it up. When you feather it upward, it tells you that it's swooping like this. See, these look like they're swooping and then dropping down like this. When the water faces you in an angle like this, you can see down into it. But when it tilts this way, it starts reflecting light. So it's going to be tilting away from you. It's going to be tilting forward. So you're going to have it. This is the reflection of the sky, and the sky is hitting it from all angles. So it's just going to, the intensity of this reflection is determined by the angle of the water. That's why I have this light color and I'm feathering it in all these different directions. Because the water is going in lots of different directions, changing the intensity of the reflected sky color. Now, the overall angle of the water as it goes back is getting more horizontal compared to your vision. When you look down here, this is hitting at 90 degrees. You see right down into there. When you look out here, all of the angles are getting more horizontal. That is until you hit the deep, deep water. Then the waves are extreme and big, and then all the angles are, it's going everywhere. That's why it stays darker out there. But this water that's shallower, we're going to get more and more of this sky color as I head out toward the horizon. But then I'm going to stop before I get there. Or at least I'm going to get way less extreme when I get out to that darker color. You don't want to get super small too fast though, because like I said, it's about 80% of your picture is foreground. Now if I just take this color and I just want a level spot, maybe this water isn't completely, maybe it's not even, maybe the same thing's not going on everywhere. So if I just make a spot that just has a lot of solid color, that tells you that that's got very little waves going. That's a level spot on the water. So you see, we're using this color to communicate to your eyes what shapes are in this translucent water. Translucent, transparent, I don't know. I say translucent because it does have a degree of opacity to it. You know, if it's deep enough, you can't see through it. And it does color the light coming through. Ooh, that was too watery on that one. Let's do some big ones out in front, get some good perspective going. As I continue to put this color on, I'm going to start looking for places that are dry, that I've already done, and maybe double up the layer right at the base, because where that reflection gets more intense, it makes it look like it's swooping this way. So I can get a lot of depth to my waves by having more of that light color right in the front of them. Doing these little guys like this. Some more in here. Wet my brush again. I can feel when the paint's starting to dry in those bristles. So I just dip it in that water, wipe it off on the rag. It's always safer with this technique to water down the paint more. It just takes longer. Just takes longer to accomplish the look. But watered down gives you the ability to do layer after layer as you see fit. I used to do them all, the smiley shapes. I did them all that way. But then I kind of like when the water looks like it's kind of heaping up. So now I like to do some frowny shapes also. Just put some here. Now I just want to get smaller and smaller as I go. This is where I want to start using smaller strokes. If you do a good job with the foreground, you can really skimp out on the background. You can kind of cheat as long as you just have color in there. If the foreground looks good enough, just an obscure background will complete the picture. Yeah, I never had a real passion for the finished product that was superior to everything. The thrill that I get is in this process right now, just proving that I can do it, figuring out the why and the how, then I'm done, satisfied. Let somebody else make the masterpiece. All right. But even way back here, your eyes still kind of pick up if you put these things in the right organization. You know, the brighter spots at the base of each brush stroke. So as I said, the waves are getting more extreme as they get out here on this dark water. Water's deeper, it doesn't have that coral reef under it, so it's not breaking the, it's not leveling out all the waves. When they hit that shallow water, those waves get broken real quick and the water starts to get calm when it gets shallow. But out here, the waves are rough, they're big, and bigger waves are a lot more pointy and spiky than small waves. And the effect of that, when you zoom way out, is something like sandpaper, which is a very non-glossy surface, non-reflective. So it's very interesting that water would be in such a non-reflective state. But that's exactly what happens on this distant ocean water. It becomes a very dull surface because all of these waves. Now I'm sure that depends on the weather conditions, but typical ocean scene is darker on the horizon. That water's rougher. The texture of it's very spiky, and you don't have a whole lot of that bright reflection of the sky. But when we zoom in on water, we see all kinds of fun patterns that we'll get into. Let's do a little bit more on this guy. Here's a little bit different technique for you when I'm just trying to cover a little bit more. Just kind of a downward swoop with the brush as it's sideways. Okay, so now let's talk about something else. So now that I've taken all this time to make all these pretty waves in here, I'm going to paint a big old wave right over the front of it. Okay, so bright green, right? Ruined it. But we need to have more green in this because as this water is brightened by the sun, it's going to become more and more green. It may not be a true green, just more green than the water that's darker. So I'm going to add white and green to the blue. Now just be patient as I show you what this is going to become. Okay, I've got this nice bright color at the base. This wave is catching all this light, but it's blocking the light from the water down here at the base. So this is going to be darker and bluer. You know, with just about every translucent substance I can think of, the color of it bends more toward yellow as it is brightened by the sun. And that is true with this. And then more towards the blue and the violet as it becomes darker in the shadows. So this darker color, I'm just trying to gracefully, fade it and match it with the blue that's already down here. That's not the reflection color, the deeper blue. And then as it ramps up, I want this bright green. So I have this bright green that I got at the paint store. The paint that they tint green at the store is brighter than, I could mix green with blue and yellow, but it wouldn't be as intense as this particular colorant that's used in the green paint that I got from the store. That's why I didn't just mix it with the primaries. I just want a more intense color. Let's put some blue in there. Darker at the base. You want it to drop right down into that blue color there. And I think I need to use more paint. Let's make this wave nice and big. I'm going to make it at kind of an angle. I see my beach, I've got it a little bit of an angle. I'll make this wave coming out toward this beach here. So let's get some paint on there. Don't be afraid to put paint on the surface. This is how you get experience, by giving yourself something to work with. All right, green and white. Right now I'm not worrying about any texture or waves. I just want to get the colors in place. I want this middle to be the brightest. Ooh, I like that bluer tone. It's greener than this, but bluer than this. I like that. This looks good too. This looks good too. We'll do a compromise between the two. All right, we do blue. Time to use some water. Need to extend this. There's a big wave. More green and white. Dish. I love that. I just love putting that bright color on there. Okay, and then I'll use my brush strokes to do this is where I'm, trying to draw the actual shape of it. This water is curling up this way, This way. Okay. So I can go with the direction of the wave like this. See, now I have some perspective in my pictures. I see a lot of pictures that are just straight across. It's nice if you make it going somewhere besides just straight back or straight forward. Okay, let's see if we can get a little brighter tone in it. Whoa, that's a lot of green. Put some blue in there, get some white. Love that color. So right now I'm just figuring out where I want my wave. Just trying to put the colors on real quickly. Let's put some blue up here. Now the wave curls over, and because it's curling over, it's blocking light from the sky. So there's a shadow. And that shadow is just a little darker and bluer color than the middle of the wave. This middle of the wave is the brightest. There's a shadow cast on the bottom. There's a shadow right under all, because this is going to be white water up here. I'll show you. Scoop my paint a little bit. Let's see how far we want to go with this guy. Let's put this blue shadow here. I like this blue. There's some water here. I do want to try to make this blue gradually fade into this blue. So I don't want too sudden of a green line right here. So maybe I'll just grab a different brush. Maybe I can just grab this little guy here. And this color was just blue and white. So I'll get a clean brush and start adding blue and white. But I still want it to be just as dark. So let's get a lot of blue in there. Now, I'm not trying to show you an exact technique right now. Just trying to show you the results that you need to try to reach for. But feel free to copy my technique. And all my work is gone. Okay. I think I want to bring it down a little bit lower here with the other brush. A little bit more blue in here. You see, there's no reflection of the sky at the base of the wave, at least not this reflection of the sky, because that reflection is coming from here and the wave's blocking it. So you have this dark shadow. There's some more green in here, get some white. Oh, back to the bright green again. I gotta make up my mind about this color. But it's cool when it changes because it shows that the wave is not the same depth in all of, it's a different depth. Where it's brighter, the water is thin and the light's coming right through it. Where it's this deeper blue, it's a bigger, more dense wave. So it's cool to have thin spots in it. All right, so let's do this. Okay, now I'm going to grab some blue. I'm going to start making the darker color at the top. Okay, now this part's fun. The white water. Pure white. Of course, it's not going to be pure because I got all this green and blue in my brush. But it's whiter than anything else in the picture. So I'm just going to start moving my brush in the direction that I want this to go. I'm just swooping my brush just like it's just piling over here. We'll say that it's starting to break right here. And here we'll do a little bit. Now they don't have the same. I've seen a lot of waves that where the artist made it breaking evenly across the whole wave, and I just don't think that looks as good. It's nice if you make it breaking in some areas, but not others. All right. Now it's going to be real white up here on the top because there's a lot of sunlight hitting it. Not worrying about cleaning my brush because the white water usually has a lot of the color in it for the shadows anyway, so I'm just going to let those mix in. But I want to get a lot of white up at the top, and I really want to stagger this. I try to work quickly so that I can keep wet on wet, mixing wet paint together. All of this is done by mixing the wet paint. I got to move quickly in order to do that, and that's where the extender that I showed to you comes in. Also dipping my brush in that, or dipping it in the water. It helps with that. It's a little bit easier to manipulate this paint if it's all wet and it's not drying on me. When it starts to dry, it starts to tug, leave marks that I don't like. But if you let it dry 100%, you can just use layers. You can just start painting in layers, which is exactly what I did with these waves. So up here we have some white water. So as I was saying, white water has a ton of surface area. And surface area is where the lightest sky reflection comes from. And on a round drop is like a tiny little magnifying glass that has a real bright point where it has a white dot where it's taking the sunlight and just sending it all to the same place. And well, when you have a million of those, you have a whole lot of little white dots making white water. The reason it doesn't happen with the other water is because the surface area is minimized and it's all depths, and it grabs all the shadows that it's trapping underneath the surface. Now here's something I want to show you. This white water has a shadow of its own. The shadow color of white water is different than the shadow of the other water. Okay. So let's get this blue brush, maybe lose some of the blue out of there. I'm going to go back to the same color I used for this reflection. And I'll just start putting this at the base of all my white water. Because this is where this white water is not exposed to the direct sunlight, and it's reflecting blue colors from the water or blue color from the sky. So you get this bluish, but it's not an intense blue. That's white water. I put a lot of it down here. Maybe put it here, put it here. I can come back and put more white over the top of that. Matter of fact, I will. So now I've established like 4 or 5 different rows of colors that I can systematically go through in order to make a breaking wave. The bright white water, the shadow of the white water, the shadow cast on the wave that's not white water, then the highly saturated bright color coming through the wave, then the shadow that's cast on the surface of the water. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stripes of color that you just kind of stagger across. And if you just get those colors right, it's amazing how quickly it starts to look like one of these crashing waves. I'm going to put some of this in here. We don't need a lot of it in here because it's not hanging over as far. I'm going to try not to get too obsessed with details here. I got white water there. Now I'm going to pull out this little brush. This little brush is clean so I can get more pure white on it. Start doing this. So up in here, this is just barely starting to break at the top. So this is still going to have a lot of this green light in it because it's not broken into as many thousands of little drops yet. It's still in larger drops and there's still the color in it. So I'm going to use more of my wave colors in this water here, the blue and the green. I'll use the blue for a shadow under it. That's probably too much blue. Do the shadow here. Right here. Then I'll just work some of that color into this white water. White water that's not as white. Put that in there. We'll do more in here. As a matter of fact, let's put a little bit of that green all over this thing. Let's just put little bits in here. It's nice to see some of that in here. You can do all kinds of combinations of color. The colors tell the story, you know. Sometimes you can just put color wherever, and if the colors are calculated real carefully, then it just creates a picture for you. You just watch it take shape as you start putting them in place. It gives me ideas all the time. I start putting colors down and I'm like, oh, that looks like I should put a wave there. Put some here, some brighter color here. A lot less white in here. I gotta fix that. So let's do a shadow now to really make this look good. Let's make sure we get that shadow. Okay, let's get this guy here. This paint dried on me. Now this is what I'm talking about. When it dries, this can be tricky. So now I have to remix my color and match it. But that's not too hard to do. But I want to do this because I need to have a shadow underneath this. I want to be sure I have this nice bright middle and then keep that dark shadow underneath this white water. But see, there's hardly any here because it's not hanging over nearly as much as the others. As a matter of fact, I could probably just make the middle brighter instead of making the shadow darker. Whoa, that's really bright. Let's use some water there. Okay, now if this was oil base, I'd be blending away with the greatest of ease. That is an advantage to oil. But before I get too carried away with this, I want to show you how to transition these waves up onto this, whatever, I don't know what to call these big waves. Okay. We want a shadow there. Let's make it bright here so we have that shadow. Like that. And then maybe we have some, I do want this shadow in here. This one's important. Let's make sure we get a good amount of deeper colors in this one. Blue. I very frequently use this longest tip of the brush. You have a lot of control with that. It takes some training some practice to get used to getting the right distance from the canvas, but I feel like I have the most control using that little tip to put the paint right where I want it. We had our reflection color. We had these waves going. So we have a few of these. I'm just going to kind of continue, but I'm not going to come all the way up. I'm going to stop before they get there. And I'll start kind of ramping them up, make them cross a little bit. this. I want to make some surf. So I'll take some pure white. And the pure white, I need to water it down just like I did with this reflection color. So I'm going to use whatever I can find to put some paint on and mix it with water. And maybe just start making some surf on here. Okay, so wherever this goes, I'm going to make it follow the patterns of the reflection here for now. The pattern with ocean surf is that it kind of gets split apart, but then is connected by little strands because the water's moving, and so it splits apart, but then has these little connections. So it's kind of like a lot of rings that are connected. Now you'll notice I'm using my brush just like I did with the big one, using this longest point of it. Now, I need to pay attention where I've made my waves. I mean, I don't need to, but it's good if I do, because then I can go with the shapes that I've made. So like this is a wave, so maybe it comes down, then up again, then down. See? So if you follow the shapes that you've made, you stay consistent with this, what you've created, and it's gonna look a lot better for you. So maybe this ramps up and then down again right here, maybe up and then down again. Here. Tighter on the back side of the wave because of the perspective. But I don't want to make too many. Always leave empty spots. And look, if you stamp with your hand, you can make real subtle duplications. What you did, it just kind of scatters it. Let's do this. Make sure you make some lines fatter than others. Okay. So it's going to start ramping up on this wave. So they're going to start going more at these upward angles right here. But what I want to show you is I'm going to change the color. I'm not going to use this light color when I get up on there. So as I do more and more of this, I'll make sure I go over spots I've already done, because it's looking pretty busy. I'll make some white water in here. We're going to make more and more of this as we come forward, but I'm going to wait because I want to show you what it looks like as it goes up on that wave. Okay, we do this darker color. I might be able to just use the reflection color because I have my shadow color established for white water. So if I have this white sea foam, then I'll just continue. I'll just continue these up. I'll try to connect it so that I need to find the lines and connect them. They're getting very suddenly stretched up onto the face of that wave. Okay, so I've cleaned this up a little bit using all of the same principles that I explained. Where I have a unusual dark spot, I want to touch that up, or where I don't like the shape a little, I messed with it, and it's still far from perfect. I mean, a real wave would have dirt color coming up in here. I skipped that because that's not what makes water look like water. So I've simplified this and cleaned it up to where I can just sleep at night. And so now I'm going to show you what happens to this surface reflection as it's over the top of this brighter sandy area. Because now the contrast is reversed. The reflection will be darker in this. So let me show you. I have this little brush now. I don't know, maybe I should use a bigger one. We'll see if this little one does good for me. So I was doing these reflections, and I redid a bunch of these to clean it up, but the exact same way I showed you. I've got my watered down reflection color here. And I'm going to start making bigger and bigger waves here. Now you can see when I get over here, all of a sudden this color is darker than this. Now this is more similar to what happens in a swimming pool or a little stream that's in the sun. You have a brighter color beneath the surface than what's being reflected from above the surface. So let's do some of these. Now I'm going to ease up on this, probably use a lighter and lighter colors that come this way, because with water you have less and less reflection as you look more directly down into it. So let me try to explain to you why this happens. As I've explained, when you look at water from a 90-degree angle straight into it, at that angle, water allows light to pass through. From above, it allows light to go into it, it allows light to escape from it, coming at that 90-degree angle. But then from angles that are like this, light's coming this way, it does not allow nearly as much to go into it or to come out from it. So the result of that is that this is reflecting the color of the sky, but it's not allowing the light from underneath to escape. See? That is, it's not allowing the light that's on that back side. So what I'm painting right now is the part of the wave that curves away from my eye, because that's at a sharper angle. It's not at that 90-degree angle. And so it's darker because it's not allowing this bright light to come out and hit my eyes. So on that back side of the wave, it's darker. That happens in the, any kind of little pool that has a bright sunlight bouncing off of the bottom. When you're looking directly, you see all that bright light, but the back side of the waves create a dark shadow. But that dark shadow is often the color of what's reflecting from above the surface. Let's do a few more of these. Trying to use big patterns now. I don't want to go overboard with this, as I always tend to do. One thing you always have to remember with this water-based paint is it dries darker. Dries darker than when you put it on. When it's wet, it's just a shade lighter. So you have to get accustomed. Like I said, I use this because it's very fast. I can't spread oil-based paint nearly as quickly as I can this. Okay, so I've got this in here. Notice that in the foreground I just did these little bits because there are fewer and fewer angles that are bent away from my line of vision as it comes closer. So I don't need as much. So I just add a little bit of white to my reflection color. So this is a mix. See, this is the color that I've been using for the reflection, and then I added some white to it to make it lighter. So I'll take this lighter shade and I'll use that just in the lower and central portions of what I've already done. See, wherever I have a low spot, right here, I'll put that lighter color. Or maybe just right in the middle, put more of it. See, like this. Okay, then right in here, you can't see the other color. So this is where it's advantageous for the sake of just the composition of the picture. Sometimes photographs can look weird because they strictly follow the laws of nature, but paintings can break them. So we can strategically put a lighter color just for the sake of seeing the waves where we want to. Then I can still use this lighter color up in here, and it'll still be a darker color. See, yeah, I mean, You get it? Same thing, just put it in the lower middle parts. When I say lower middle, I mean the lower middle portion of each brush stroke or group of brush strokes. Not referring to the whole picture. You can see I'm not being super careful about this. Okay, put some in there. This looks like a good place for a flat area. I really love how just having that color just creates shape on the surface. It's really just a matter of getting those colors consistent. Do little things like this. And I can even go up in here. See here, since I put some of this white water, or I put some of the sea foam, some of my waves are kind of getting lost. So I could just redefine them a little bit with this brighter color. Need a little brush and a lot of time, which is something I don't have too often. Some here, little bits, yeah, and then you maintain that you maintain a difference between the reflective surface of the water and that white sea foam. It's amazing how just the slightest difference, I mean the difference between this color and this color is hardly anything, but because of the context and what it's compared to in the same area, it makes a big difference to put it in there. Little changes make a big difference. Kind of like DNA. That was another geeky comment. Okay. Do more of this. More in here. I like how you can finally see that brings this water to life in this area. In this area, my color beneath is the same value as my reflection above, so all of the texture disappears. And this often happens when you're looking at water. It just doesn't make for an awesome painting. Make some big ones in here. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is some sea foam. More of that white water, or as my brother Ben calls it, suds, like we did calling the dish soap when we were growing up. Okay, pure white. Now, I don't have this pre-mixed with water added to it, but that might be to my advantage to do that. So, the patterns of the sea foam are going to be less scrunched on these faces. So, I'll go more horizontal on the reflective parts that are more horizontal shapes, and then I'll do a little bit more vertical patterns as they come across the face of these. By maintaining that pattern, I'll stay consistent with the shape of the waves without destroying it. And by not putting too much. You can easily put too much. So the way I'm building this is thinking zigzagging lines that follow the pattern I just described, but then breaking it. I don't want to make a solid line for too long of a distance, because that's just not the way the sea foam typically occurs. Okay, then the other thing I want to do is make sure I have big patterns as I get closer and closer here. So maybe as I get up in here, I'm going to start making big shapes. I've made this mistake before where I make too small of a texture, too small of shapes in my foreground. And then it causes my picture to look kind of warped. I don't have good perspective. Drawing is great practice for staying consistent with your perspective, because lines, everything happens in lines, and perspective is built with lines. Whether they're lines with soft edges or hard edges. Okay, then maybe up in the front. It's hard to get in on my knees. Maybe up in the front here I want to have a whole bunch of this. I got to leave some open water though, because I need to still do the squiggly bright reflections on the on the sandy floor of it. So right here, we'll say that I purposely made this curved so that I can make a wave kind of rolling back out, or like a little one that just, you know how they overlap each other. Okay, so you get all this white water right here in the front. And this is where the shadow becomes a lot more important. Okay, let's try to stay consistent with our little lines. I don't want to get too sloppy. Alright, put some here. This. White water or foam. There's a difference between foam is bubbles, white water is drops. So there's a difference there, but the effect is very similar. Okay, this. Okay, now it needs a shadow. So, my reflection color. Oh, that's very blue. I might have to add more red to that. It is bluer than I want it. Isn't that funny how it just, up here it looks so much different, but this light color is this dark color. Exact same color. Which just demonstrates my point that the comparison that's near it is everything. Context. So, if you have that bright turquoise look to it, you just add a touch of red. Just a touch. See, this is just the tiniest little dot, and it's still probably too much. So let's put that in here. There we go. It's a real soft, kind of a muted purple. If I wanted a more vivid purple, I'd use magenta instead of red. Let's do this. More of this color. Then I'll scoop up that red. Right here. Add more white. Now I'm really simplifying here. I mean, this might be piled up and you might have multiple little mounds, kind of like clouds. But I'm demonstrating to you the light and the shadow. I want you to just see kind of how these things work. So then I need one last shadow right under this that's darker. So to do that, I think I could probably do that just by, let's see if just the red and the blue work without as much white added. See how powerful that red is? And watch out for that. Do more of this. So this is coming up on wet sand, so you can get both a shadow and a reflection, causing a lot of times that real hard edge and their real defined little shadow. Maybe what color did I use? Yeah, use pure white. I'm gonna get down here on my knees so that I can get a more direct look at what I'm doing. Okay, I'm gonna soften this edge so that it looks like it's wrapping down there. One thing I can assure you is that my painting is wrong. They always are. What's fun is the little things that are right and the difference that it makes. You know, it's always a learning experience. So, feel free to paint a million wrong paintings and join the club. Now, I do have an inconsistency here because my shadow here is going straight, but now my white water is going like this, so don't want that. So I'll try to obscure it a little bit, blur it out. You know, this is something that will just be an eyesore, make the wave look a little bit unnatural. Another fun thing to do on the faces of these waves, now the faces meaning this saturated darker color. Sometimes right on that face you'll have that seafloor color showing through. I just want to be careful with, you know, subtle. I lean towards subtle with these things. They're just little highlights. You can quickly overdo things that are meant to be highlights because you do one and you're like, oh, that was awesome. And then I'm going to do it 20 times now because that'll be 20 times as awesome. And it's not. See? So on the face of the wave, as long as I stay consistent with my rule that the face of the wave is what shows what's underneath, then I can put a darker color, lighter color. It depends on what's under the water. One thing that can really help with the realistic quality of these foreground waves breaking on the shore here is putting a shadow underneath these little strands of sea foam here. I'm going to paint this wherever I see the sea foam. I'm just going to leave maybe this amount of space under it and then bring that color all the way down to the top of the other bits of sea foam that I made. Now, this could take forever to do a real clean job. So I'll do a kind of a messy job and then just come back to it and fix anywhere that I messed up the white. Making it flush with the little strands of sea foam on the top edges, but then leaving space on the lower edges so that it has the appearance of these shadows. There. These colors are so close together. Feels like you're not making any progress when you do this. Feels like, oh, this isn't right. You know, this is just a waste of time. I'm just putting, no one's even going to see what I'm doing here. But no, when it's all done, it shows up. Eyes are more perceptive than it seems when you have been staring at this picture for too long. Okay, now the next way you can do it is to do the shadows first. And right here, it's really, I mean, it's so shallow right here. I'm going to put white right on top of these so that you can barely even see the shadow, but I'm doing just in case. So I just have those tiny little shadows. So we'll go a little here, very close to the shadow, because this is very shallow water. But as I get further away, I'll get further and further from the shadow. Put a little bit there. The point of this video series is not to just load you up with a bunch of brush techniques. I mean, these are mine. It's pointless to try to be just like somebody else. You know, you'll get the most value out of just gaining knowledge and ability and then applying it to your own preferences and techniques. I mean, invent something better than mine. I'm going to change mine in a couple weeks. I always do. So I try to steer people away from just copying my techniques. Even though I always feel really proud when people say that they used my, that something helped, or I try to encourage an adventurous approach. Let's put a little bit of white water right here to finish this off. Just make this just the littlest bit.